Hello and welcome to this short video on defining works of art. Some potential definitions of art that we can find in the history of the humanities include three major schools. The first one is called Representationalism, which basically says that artwork should be realistic in their subject matter, and in fact we should judge a work of art by how realistic it is. But we also have something called Expressionism, which is the idea that artworks express feelings and emotions, especially of the artists themselves. And this school of thought basically says that we should judge artworks based on the subject matter of emotions and feelings. But there's also Formalism, which says that it's the elements of form comprising a work that make it art. In other words, forms that seem to communicate something to us are what define a work of art. Now, none of these definitions really cover everything that could possibly be art. For one thing, they tend to define art as good art, which is a little bit problematic because, as we all know, there are bad artworks out there. And in fact, we need to make room for this kind of artwork, a bad artwork, in our definition of art if we're really going to have any hope of nailing it down in some fashion. So what we're going to do, instead of trying to define art in terms of the necessary and sufficient conditions for a work of art, we're going to look at four categories or aspects of artworks that really should be there, and whether or not we're a representationalist, an expressionist, or a formalist, we can definitely see all of these things in the work of art that we look at. The first way that we can perceptually define or identify a work of art is something called artistic form. And artistic form is really just the organization of a work of art, such that it clarifies some subject matter. And really what we're looking for here is a perceptible unity, something of a whole that we can sense in the work of art. Do all of the things or parts work together to create some deeper meaning, in other words? We also have something called participation, which is the idea that we can lose ourselves in the work of art. In fact, we can do this through sustained attention. And I like to think of this as sort of a communion with the work of art, something where we deeply enter it and enrich ourselves by doing so. Next, we have something called the content of the work of art, which is really how the work deals with some subject matter. It's something beyond the work of art itself. Rather, it's an interpretation of the subject matter. Finally, we have the subject matter of the work of art itself. And really, this is what the work is ultimately about. It is the value or values it expresses. I think as we go through the course, you will be able to appreciate more of how these four aspects work together and how we can use them to identify works of art. Let's take a brief look at two works drawn from painting that can help us apply these aspects. First, we have Goya's May the 3rd, 1808, painted in 1814. The subject matter of the work seems to be a wartime massacre being perpetrated by a group of soldiers. In fact, the painting is based on the uprising of the Spaniards against the new king, Napoleon's brother. Participating in this work of art seems easy to me because I think we can readily identify with the fear on the man in white's face as the guns are pointed toward him. His face is not the only one in the painting, but it is the most expressive one we can see, and I think this contrasts with the facelessness of the soldiers. The artistic form is perceptible in many ways, but one way that it stands out to me is the darkness above the men in the painting. It seems as if it is about to engulf the scene, and the soldiers themselves seem to be at the head of a line of darkness that is overtaking the rebels. The content of this work of art, then, seems to be that war is a monster that can snuff out good as well as make some faceless perpetrators and bringers of darkness. Goya's work is powerful, and I encourage you to take a moment to appreciate its power. Next, we have Gentileschi's self-portrait as the allegory of painting, which was painted in 1638 to 1639. The subject matter of the painting seems obvious enough. Gentileschi has painted herself in the process of painting. However, we can participate in this work of art by imagining ourselves deeply involved in a passionate undertaking such as the one that she is involved in. I think we can see the content of this painting as Gentileschi treating painting as a means of revealing or illuminating the truth of a subject. The reason why I think this is that the artistic form supports this interpretation. The light source in the painting seems to be coming from the painting itself. Thus, painting herself reveals something of her character as an illuminator of the world and its inhabitants. Now, whether or not you think these are good analyses of the works of art, I think that you can see that good analysis and criticism can help us participate with works of art. They can reveal to us something that we might not otherwise have seen. Well, that's it for this short lecture on defining works of art. Thank you, and see you soon.